Here's something that shouldn't be true. A boring offset account can very nearly beat the ASX 200. And at the top tax bracket, it's a genuine photo finish. If you've got a mortgage and a bit of cash spare, you're probably choosing between exactly these two. Feed the offset or put it into ETFs. Both feel smart. But almost nobody runs both properly through the tax system. And when you do, the gap between them gets a lot smaller than it looks. Let me show you the maths, with your bracket, not a vibe. Quick one. This is general information, not financial or tax advice. I'm not licensed. It doesn't consider your personal situation. And the numbers are illustrative examples. Do your own research. Right. Meet Sarah. She's on 150 grand. She's got a mortgage at 6.1% and 50 grand sitting spare. Offset or ETF is. We'll follow her the whole way because should I park it or invest it is probably the biggest 50 grand decision she's not thinking about. An offset is just a savings account that sits against your loan. Whatever's in it, you don't pay interest on. Sarah's 50 grand against a loan at 6.1. She's not earning 6.1%. She's not paying it. That's about 3 grand a year she simply never hands over. And here's the bit people miss, that saving is completely tax-free. The tax office can't touch money you never spent. Because it's tax-free, it's worth more than the number on the tin. On Sarah's income, her next dollar's taxed at 39%, so to actually keep that 3 grand, she'd have to earn about 5 before tax. At today's rate and her bracket, that makes her humble offset the equivalent of a 10% return before tax. Certain, not hoped for. Very little else in finance is that predictable. So how do shares stack up? That 8.1% isn't all yours. It's taxed in 2 very different pieces. Roughly half is growth, half is dividends. The growth, held past a year, gets the 50% capital gains discount, taxed at about half your rate. The dividends are taxed as income, but franking credits hand back a chunk of company tax already paid. And the quiet one, most comparisons skip. You only pay capital gains tax when you sell, so the growth compounds untaxed for years. Point is, shares get real tax help too. It's only a fair fight once you count it. Run Sarah's shares through properly, over 10 years, and that 8.1 becomes about 6.85 in her pocket. The offset? 6.1, tax-free, every year. So shares do win, by about 0.75% a year. That's the entire reward for taking on the whole share market's risk. In dollars, Sarah's 50 grand, 10 years. Offset. About 90,400. Shares, after she pays the capital gains tax at the end, about 97,000. Shares come out ahead by roughly 6.5 grand. Over a decade. On 50 grand, the whole premium for riding 10 years of market ups and downs. On paper, shares beat the offset by about 6.5 grand over 10 years. But that edge is an after-tax number, and it depends entirely on your tax bracket. Watch what happens. Start in the 32% bracket. Here, shares still beat the offset by 1.25% a year. Now climb to 39%. The tax office takes a bigger cut, so that edge shrinks to 0.75. But push into the top bracket, 47%, and here's the part nobody tells you. It almost disappears. 0.17% a year. Basically a rounding error. Same shares, same 8.1%. The only thing that changed was your tax bracket, and it nearly wiped the whole advantage out. Let's make it real and do it live. You've already seen the answer. About 90,004 for the offset, 97 for the shares. One honest caveat on the setup. This is a lump sum going in today and left 10 years. If you'd instead drip feed spare cash in month by month, your market exposure builds up gradually. Smoother ride, but less money working early. And here's the real point. Change any one input. Her bracket, her rate, her timeline, and the whole answer moves. That's the difference between real numbers and a headline. Now, that's today's rules. There's a change proposed to start in July 2027. It would scrap the 50% capital gains discount and replace it with two things: indexing your gain to inflation and a minimum 30% tax on the capital gain. Really important, this is not law. It's a proposal, the fine detail isn't settled, and it could change or not happen at all. And note, our simplified version just taxes the whole gain at 30%. It leaves out the inflation indexing bit, which would actually soften the hit to shares. So, treat this as the pessimistic end for shares. On that basis, Sarah's edge shrinks from 0.75% to about 0.4, and at the top bracket, under this illustrative version, the offset would edge ahead. I'll do a proper breakdown if and when it becomes law, but the likely direction's clear enough. Tax gains harder, and the humble offset only looks stronger. 3 what-ifs, because the answer isn't fixed. Rates. If Sarah's loan climbs to 7 or 8%, her offset's tax-free saving climbs with it automatically. And it cuts both ways. If rates fall, that edge narrows and shares start to look better. Returns. Nobody can promise 8.1. Do worse, and the offset can win even today. And the honest one? Time. Everything I've shown is 10 years. Stretch it to 20 or 30, and under today's rules, shares' small edge compounds into a real one, because that deferred, untaxed growth keeps snowballing. Short horizon favours the offset. Long horizon favours shares. That's not a loophole, it's just the maths, and you deserve to see it both ways. Before Sarah, or you, do anything, 3 traps. 1. Confusing redraw with offset. An offset keeps the money yours and flexible. 2. Comparing the market's headline return to your offset rate. It's the after-tax number that counts, and that index headline is also before fund fees, which trim the share side a touch more. 3. Forgetting the human bit, the best return on paper is worthless if you panic sell at the bottom. The market's paid nothing to the person who bailed in the crash. The offset never has a bad quarter. Before the verdict, the elephant in the room, super. For a high earner like Sarah, salary sacrificing is taxed at just 15% going in. Instead of her 39, a 24-point head, start the offset, and shares simply can't match on tax. I've kept it out of today's head-to-head for one honest reason. Super is locked away until around 60, and this whole video is about money you can still reach. But on a pure tax basis, for money you can lock away, it's the most powerful lever most Australians underuse. So it's getting its own video. So, pulling it together, the maths favours the offset when the bracket is high. The cash might be needed soon, or certainty matters most. It favours shares when the bracket is lower. The horizon runs to decades, and a crash can pass without a panic sell. For Sarah, the question is simply which of those describes her situation. And notice, it was never really offset or shares. The strongest setups use each for what it's best at. The offset for safety and certainty. Shares for long-run growth. And there's a third mechanic that ties them together, debt recycling, where borrowing against the home to invest can make part of the interest tax deductible. Fair warning though, it's advanced, it carries real risks, and it's genuinely one for personal advice. So I'll make a dedicated video on it down the track. Here's the honest verdict, fine print and all. Over 10 years, at Sarah's bracket, shares win by a whisker. The offset lands at about 93% of where the shares end up, without a decade of market ups and downs. The question was never who wins. It's whether that thin extra for full share market risk is worth it for you, at your bracket, over your timeline. There's a free calculator in the description. Pop in a rate, a bracket, and a timeline, and it shows the illustrative maths for that scenario. It's a learning tool, not advice, and it doesn't know your circumstances. And if you want Aussie money decisions broken down with the actual maths instead of vibes, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. And that debt recycling video is coming soon.